Okay, let's start. Okay, so as I told yesterday, for people who have joined today, MDI 7 and 8 needs to be read together, both for your assignments and for answering your end term examination, as well as for the better understanding of the subject. Because 7 is about labor and labor markets, whereas 8 is about production process and labor markets. In fact, I would feel uh, first read MDI 8 and then go into MDI 7, because the production process will determine how the labor will move or the labor markets will move. It's a very interesting thing. And again, as we spoke yesterday, the reason why we need to read about labor, production, etc., is because the largest migration happens out of employment or to earn a livelihood. And also we will see during the course of the various units that everything which is happening today, one can go back into history and see how it evolved into today, and things keep repeating itself. In fact, the whole history of human being has a lot of cyclic things into it. In fact, you will see a lot of production processes which are happening today have a precursor in the 16th century or 17th century in a more refined way. We also need to understand, as human beings have become more evolved, more civilized, and globalization has set foot, how things have changed. But essentially, a lot of things have remained the same as were there earlier. So again, as I said, you can stop me at any moment of time to ask a query or to add value. This is an experiential class. It need not go through a monologue. If you have anything, you can quickly stop me and ask or add. So let's look at the early models of production organization. We are looking at the concepts of production organization, about slavery and indentured labor. So, Middle Age, there was feudalism in much of Europe. If you are able to either relate to what we see or have heard or read in India, there was kind of similarities. Europe is taken as an example in this unit. A lot of examples from Europe has been done, but the same can be, looked at or replicated in India in slightly different ways. Because remember, the societies were different, the way structures were organized was different. When I say India Orient, in Asia, it would have been slightly different. In Middle East, it would have been slightly different. But by far, the society was organized in by far the same way. Middle Ages, there was feudalism in much of Europe, largely worked through customs and tradition. Main economic institution was the manor. Remember, in India, there was the Jajmani system. There was the Jajman, who was like a manor. There was a sort of a feudalism with princes, with lords. The same thing equated, worked almost across the world. Each manor had their own customs that governed the people rather than in their own laws. Remember, the landlords, the thakurs, each thakur which owned a particular set of lands had various people taking care of various needs of the thakur, who would get a reciprocal arrangement. In fact, the whole caste system evolved around the same jajmani, or the thakur or the landlord. The feudal organization was based on a system of mutual obligation and services up and down the feudal hierarchy. Very similar to the caste system. The caste system evolved in sort of a feudal way. There was a guy at the top, the landlord, the thakur, the judgeman, or whatever it is, and there were, all these people down the chain. In the hierarchy at the lowest rung, the serfs of the peasants were situated, protected by the lord and manor, who in turn were protected by higher overlords. One essential difference possibly was the fact that the church had a major role to play in Europe. Whereas in India, when we say the church, the religious organization had did not have that kind of a role as it was there in Europe. The most powerful, and I think to a large extent the way the major religion of Hinduism was constructed into sects, into various ways of worship, with multiple deities, multiple ways of understanding religion and relating to God, itself allowed more secularism in the country rather than a religious overtone which was there in Europe. Most powerful in the ruling classes were religious lords, secular nobility. Here, there was a lot of secular nobility that way. Uh, then came the artisanal production. For a long time, a characteristic of feudalism was a combination of agriculture as the basic branch, domestic handicrafts, which supplemented to it. As civilization and evolution was happening, as in fact civilization was happening, discovery of metals, uh, and people experimented, few imported products. Now, always remember the fact. Why few imported products, why the societies were secular? Because transportation, it was inhospitable lands, transportation was difficult, there were very few traders, far and few. Traders would take the mule route, or the even if there was a silk route, the roads came in much later. Most of the societies were closed and external trade was very little, because these were all self-sustaining societies. Each had figured out a way to contribute to the society. Very similar across the world. Then came the guild system. Guild system was nothing but a federation where people came together. Many cities which basically engaged in the production of manufacturing goods, sold to manors in rural areas, traded in long distance commerce. In the cities was the guild, crafts, and trade associations. So these are associations. So again, remember, naturally these have evolved over a period of time. What we see as FICCI and SOCM is something like the guild system, where people from the industry come together to form an association. Production of goods in the town was organized through the guild system. Um, and naturally, guild system was advantageous because now they could pool in resources, they could pool in, and it became a political force. Remember, politics becomes a underlying way how to operate throughout history. The craft guild was a formal association of specialized artisans backed by superior political sanction. And remember, because there was this manor system, it was a political power. There was this religious lords, which was a political power. And then there was this competition between them. And if you have an association, a crafts association, you have to, figure out how to navigate. A group of people hold more power than a single individual. What we see as politics even today, they offer what SOCM or FICCI does in terms of lobbying with the government, political power. They there are organization, industrial organization, they try and push their case, dependent on grants of letter of patents by monarch or other authorities to enforce flow of trade to the self-employed members, which is now done by what say a parliament, which passes a law, and there are various arms of the government which tries and does this. But the associations are still there, they still lobby, they still try and curry favors out of the politicians or the political system. These crafts will by the buyers of raw materials, seller of its products, responsibility for quality standards. We could also look at Amazon in a way as a guild, where they are trying to ensure quality, ensure buyers, sellers, all at one platform. So if you see, things have changed, but yet they have remained the same. It's like new technologies have added to refine the earlier processes. Operated as a political and administrative unit that protected its members from depriving of ownership or proprietary rights by opportunistic urban elite. what you relate to today. If anybody wanted to produce any good, he had to join a guild. If you have to, buy a product, you have to join Amazon. If you have to sell a product, you have to join Amazon. So you see, it has become refined. There are technology processes, there are other issues, but the basis of operation remains the same. Craftsmen sold their goods wholesale to merchants, who in turn transported them. So the idea was to make it efficient. The organization of guilds in crafts found their counterparts in the organization of guilds in trade. Obviously, they realized the fact that the association held, more bargaining power. They had a political power. They could protect their members. The basic task of merchant guilds was to struggle with competition from outside merchants, regulation of weights and measures, defense of merchant rights from infringement of the feudal plots. What we typically do today. So that was the guild system in Europe. A similar system would have existed in India. They would put it this. There are these markets. To even today, in a metro like Delhi or maybe Bombay, there would be this, weekly markets. Those markets are there are you have to be a member of those markets. They set those rates. They set those positions. They lobby with the political, process, and so on and so forth. Not only involved in manufacturing and dealing with economic problems, but also involved with social and religious affairs of its members, essentially taking care of the members' everyday affairs. They guided and regulated all aspects of members' lives, social, political, and economic. It was advantageous to the member to join a guild because and mostly it was he would get power in the numbers. The guild got, this additional members allowed them to, lobby with political powers, and so on and so forth. Then came the putting out system. And again, as I speak and as you read, you will realize what we are seeing in today's world as outsourcing is something of the putting out system. Around 16th century, expanding trade and commerce, increase in demand for manufacturing goods, merchants increasingly took out control of the production process. And when they took control of the production process, the merchants would provide independent craftsmen the raw material and pay them to a fee to work. Outsourcing of today. The work was done in home or independent workshop. As we go down in the later units, when we read outsourcing, offshoring, etc., we will see the same processes happening. Much more refined, but the same processes. Merchants had much wider contacts with suppliers. For selling the finished products, the merchant commanded even wider areas. And obviously, with numbers, you get a better price, you get a better reach. You are Amazon. The amount of reach a small, seller is able to command with Amazon is phenomenal. It's like a guild. It's a guild of merchants who are trying to sell products. And it is also a merchant of craftsmen selling their products, and a merchant of traders, selling, and then there are the buyers, all at one platform. As the traders expanded, craftsmen became partially or fully dependent on merchants, who not only put out his raw material but also lent credit, and in this way could impose conditions. Typically Amazon. So if a product does very well on Amazon, Amazon typically buys out that craftsman or that seller, or brings out a similar product, that Solimo products that they get, and they impose conditions. This is how you can sell, this is not you can sell, etc., etc. Expansion of export industries and growth of putting out system led to expansion of industries in the rural areas. So as I said, if you see, it almost feels like things are cyclic. And now you start equating, as these things would have changed, how would the labor movement happen? And with those labor movements, how would migration happen of people? And you will not naturally see, for example, yesterday we were talking about the fact how in the course of development, it moved from agriculture into industry, into service industry. You will see how the production itself, when it changed, how the people moved out and changed in terms of labor and labor markets. 16th century putting out system, variants of the system, craftsmen to the merchants, spread to many branches of production. And obviously, if the system is efficient, nobody needs to push or sell. Any system which is efficient inevitably will be adopted by multiple people or multiple organizations or multiple areas. Mining, metallurgy, manufacturing of small articles, and as metals were discovered, metallurgy came in, textiles came in, printing came in, paper making came in, used guild labor. In general, rougher work was done in the countryside and finishing it in the town. Something offshoring, done something out here, taken somewhere else and done out there. As I said, it's only become refined now. It's become refined. It's become, there is a lot of technology involved. There's a lot of communication involved. At the same time, the precursor of today was there in the 16th century. In the later period of putting out system, the merchant owned the tools and machinery, often the building which the production took place. To try and get control, as we shall see in the later unit, today you don't even need to own the tools and machinery. Somebody else can own the tool and machinery. There are processes. The merchant hired workers to use these tools, furnished them with raw material, took out the finished products, now became dependent on the merchants. So whatever system kind of gave more profits or was more efficient was adopted. And that is why it is very important to understand how the society was moving as and as things became as the society became complex, as the means of communication and transportation increased, and naturally everything follows suit. There are multiple ways things move. So more often than not, we tend to hear in the media about reductionism, that technology causes this. In fact, society makes sure that certain technologies are developed to enhance efficiency in the society. So there is a social context to technology. Technology does not come out in vacuum. Processes, technology, everything comes out with a social context. Why? What has happened? What are the reasons? And reasons are not just one. There are multiple reasons why things happen. The growth of putting out system involved important displacement of the industries into regions where guild restrictions did not exist, such as the rural areas. So once guilds became stronger, they had political power. Obviously, they started resisting. Obviously, in a response to this, putting out system moved into rural areas. And when these things are happening, the production organization is changing, societies change, families change, everything changes along. Putting out system led to what was called the mini factories, which was a precursors to factories. Tiny outfits where concentration of artisan type of labor took place. So, as I said, there is a societal context to everything which is happening. There is the societal also, there is an economic context, there is a political context, and then there are all these X factors which come into picture. Production of goods was based on hand labor, such as textile. Division of labor was through skill specialization. What also happened post industrial revolution? Division of labor, skill specialization. And if you see, we are again going, there was a time when they were saying skill specialization. Now they are saying you need to be a generalist, so on and so forth. The manufacturing basically took two forms: association in one workshop of workers in different specialities, linked by consecutive performance, making relatively complex products. What we after the industrial revolution was called a factory, where there was a factory line or a production line. Here there was no production line because these were early days. And the second was association in workshop of artisans of the same specialty, and subsequent breakdown of identical jobs, both precursors to the factory system. So once the template was already there, the industrial revolution and the setting up of the factories and the coming of the capital just made it more refined and efficient. When specialized knowledge and technical abilities were required, entrepreneurs organized the various processes under one roof and created a factory. Early 16th century England was John Wincomb's factory at Newbury. So you see, already the precursors were there. Everything which happens has a precursor. Nothing happens suddenly. There are always these bits of movement happening, bits of innovation happening, bits of technology happening, bits of processes which are happening, and then they come together to form a new thing. Many factories always employed, beside their concentrated labor force, outworkers in towns or nearby countryside, all working at home. At the same time, a center for putting out system. Manufactories were often focal points of networks of cottage industries, place where production process was eventually finished. What we see, the ancillary and the main factory, Maruti factory and its ancillaries. In the 16th century, these were manufactories. Now we call them ancillaries. The terminology has changed. The process has become much more refined. It has become much more process driven. There is overseer. It's become the scale has become bigger, but the main idea remains the same. Certain number of final operations took place in the central beginnings, will later increase in size. Certain processes tend to be concentrated in one place. Slowly, a manufactory began to take shape. Manufactory based on manual labor could not restructure all artisans, which prevented, at that time, helped to expand domestic and international market, but could not fulfill increased demand. Meanwhile, transportation, roads were coming, railways were coming, industrial revolution was happening, the whole process of capitalism was taking roots. They were models of instruments of technical progress, created conditions for transition by simplifying work operations, updated tools, trained workers. You see, incremental changes leading to the industrial revolution. Use the term proto-industrialization for this type of production system. So it was not just that suddenly industrialization happened or an industrial revolution happened. So, it's a nice term to use in terms of a revolution, but it was already gearing towards that process. Similarly, look at the fact we constantly hear the term information revolution. Now, why is it a revolution? Obviously, as the society or the world population increased, society is becoming more complex. Obviously, a lot of information needs to travel back and forth to maintain a harmonious working of the society. Obviously, to more information moving back and forth, you require technology devices to generate that data, to capture that data, to process that data. It's all building up to this society, and we nicely use the term information revolution. According to him, was the first phase of industrialization when a large number of underemployed people from the rural areas moved beyond their immediate region in search of. The migration was already happening. This was now a migration for employment. Earlier, people used to move because possibly the resources were less. So, for example, why people, the earliest human beings moved out of Africa where they evolved, possibly there was a lack of resources, possibly some human beings wanted to see what is there beyond where they stayed. There could have been multiple reasons. Now, this was the first time when people were moving for employment, for for earning a wage in search of employment. Labor migrations undermine the authority of the guilds to control labor, thereby opening the way for violent industrial growth. So the society had reached a point where there was the only thing next was industry. Also weakened the rural institution like manorial system, inheritance patterns, which had kept a check on the growth of population. And once this happened, you will see once, people earlier, everything was collectively owned. Then people started fencing. A private sense started developing. With the private sense started developing, capitalism was bound to come in. Resulted in increase in population, creating a large reserve for the upcoming industry. So everything was moving. What typically we see in India, in terms of rural areas, agriculture dwindling, population increasing, population is moving out, the basic political structures no longer hold true. Earlier, what the elders of the village would say to the youngsters, people would follow, no longer the case. These three types really appeared in pure form. There were many transition stages between crafts and putting out system. So obviously there were these in-between system. Everything has not been documented, captured. And remember, these are not silos. Things do not happen that, oh, now the putting out system has closed and the manufactories have started. Simultaneously, things happen. Manufacturing and putting out were often linked as part of the work was done by crafters or cottage workers. And then it led to the factory system. Mill, which had begun to be built in England at the end of the 18th century, became more widespread. Also, remember the fact colonization had already happened. The colonies were exploited for raw materials, for capital, for labor. Two sectors, textile and metallurgy, were particularly leading in this respect. The factory system was basically a product of the industrial revolution. So, industrial revolution, again, all the conditions were right and things happened, which there is a term for it, which is called the Goldilocks effect, where the pudding was just right. The temperature of the pudding was just right for Goldilocks to eat that pudding. Revolution brought both qualitative and quantitative changes to the method of industrial production, three types of changes to the manufacturing, technology, processing, and organization. So once the industry came in, obviously you needed technology, you needed processing, and you also need organization. So as the society becomes more complex, you need ways and means of organizing it. Technology changes mechanization and systematic and generalized use of machinery, substituted the skill of man at the stages of industrial production. And it was required because the population had started increasing. Now, to feed that extra population, you needed the use of machines. Processing change, improvements in the procurement and the working of raw materials, metallurgy, like, and also remember processes, because of the change of technology, obviously people were experimenting, they were finding more efficient processes. New minerals, raw materials, and fuels substituted the traditional organic material. So mining was happening, new materials were coming in, were not only cheaper but had elastic supply in comparison to traditional raw materials, which had inelastic supply. Remember, now Europe was sourcing it out of its colonies. They were exploiting the colonies, and obviously, it made sense once they had the capital and the raw materials that technology that the industrial revolution would happen. Increased use of new form of energy, inanimate power, steam came in, took the place of human and animal power, invention of steam engine, large scale mechanization, drive any kind of machinery. And this large scale mechanization was required because of increase of population, to reach out to that population, to feed that population. Essential feature of factory was concentration of manpower. In metallurgy and mining, labor concentration was combined with the use of advanced technical apparatus such as pumps, furnaces, and machines. And in all this, capital was indispensable. And that's where the capital came from, the colonies. For example, during the 18th century, India was, if you see the GDPs, world GDP, you should, I'm sure if you Google and say world GDPs throughout history, you will see how the Orient was much, much richer than the West. And the West today has been made by exploiting the Orient or Africa and Asia. You see the kind of GDP changes which have happened from 1 AD till today. There is a map, there is an infographics online. If you Google change of GDPs, you will see. In fact, during the Mughal times, India was way, way richer than the Spice Islands, the Golden Peacock, the land of the Golden Peacock. That's what India was. Capital was indispensable. So once capital started coming in and the industrialization came in, then the whole process of capitalism took roots. And in all these, they were the entrepreneurs, traders and merchants who were able to furnish the craftsmen. And remember, throughout history, since early times, there were always these entrepreneurs, these traders who would take risk. Trading is not a very new phenomena. Trading was there even during Indus Valley civilization. There was movement. There were these, people who would move. They were scholars. They were, those travelers. They used to be called travelers, who used to write their account when they would travel. They would, they were always traders and merchants who were able to furnish the craftsmen and with raw materials, employ labor force which was available through transformation. Noblemen and even princes took a personal interest in the industrial activity. So it was actually like the king of Spain or the king of Portugal who got Spain and Portugal to send their ships on trading missions. Same with the king of England. So all these European small countries, their rulers were the ones who took interest. And that East India Company was nothing but a trading company. Dutch East India Company was a trading company. The trading company, looked at trade. That then, the places were colonized. And it's not there. In fact, all arts which developed in India was patronized by nobles. Bahadur Shah Zafar, the last Mughal king, was a major patron of creative arts. In fact, a lot of creative arts took place in Awadh. A lot of these Nawabs, kings, they were patrons of these arts. 1780 to 1880 industries were the three things which were propelling was cotton, iron, and railroad. And look at the fact. Obviously, once the railroad coming came in, everything the start of globalization. Now you could move from point A to point B much faster. It was Great Britain that these industries underwent their earliest and most remarkable development. Share of industries grew from 42% to 60% and reached 73% in 87. Now, obviously, the industries or Britain was the first place to have this industry set up. The manufacturing went through the roof. And then you will see how this impacted the British citizens in terms of people, how the labor movement happened, the conditions of the labor in Britain at that time. There are consequences. Everything has consequences. As I was telling yesterday, everything that is done has intended consequences and unintended consequences. It separated organization and operative functions, hired contractual labor, organization of labor under factory system, who worked under centralized management authority and according to elaborate patterns of division of labor. There was the employee who not only hired the labor, marketed the finishing, but also supplied capital equipment, supervised and managed the use of capital. There was now a separate class which was developing, which was called the capitalist class. So there was, and was the starting of the managerial class. Because as I said, as things become complex, obviously one would need to devise ways to manage that complexity. The workers no longer capable of owning and furnishing the means of production were reduced to the status of a hand. Factory also had a certain discipline, eventually create a new type of worker who would work according to the clock for a fixed number of hours. That also happened later. Earlier, it was a free for all. In fact, Britain passed on certain rules so that the people could not organize. If you read literature, Charles Dickens used to be writing during that time. Charles Dickens had to leave school and join a factory and come back and finish his studies. Children were employed, women were employed, the conditions were abysmal. What we see in slums in urban areas in India, everything was the same. The old division of labor based on skill collapsed and the machinery converted most labor to the denomination of unskilled without any difference. Now, once there was an industry, it was everybody was unskilled in a particular way. Number of such workers in total population increased steadily. Obviously, that is where the economists felt that the way to develop was agriculture, then industry, and then services. In Great Britain, the share of working population employed in manufacturing industry reached about 50% because the agriculture had collapsed. Population had increased. Now those populations need to be engaged. They would come to the cities. The cities became a giant pool of squalor. Share of tertiary activities greatly increased and changed structurally. Led to the development of industrial employment, urbanization, system of wage payment, particularly in Britain. Exactly, very much what we see in India. And urbanization is a direct, result of industrialization. There is a big industry, there is an urban center around it, and so on and so forth. The world of industry, trade, and services, which employed 2/3 of all employment at the beginning of the century, employed 4/5 by 1871. And because machinery had come in, the agricultural also need, now with the combined harvester, you don't need that, number of labor to harvest a field. A combined harvester can do the job in 1 or 2 days at a fraction of a cost. Number of people employed in agriculture in the British countryside remained stable, were an important source of manpower for the industry. With agriculture exodus, flight of ruined artisans, demographic formation of miserable and available labor force. What we see exactly in India and other countries. And the capitalists would not want any laws favoring the labor because it cuts their profit. And simultaneously there was a new development of slavery and indentured labor. Now again, slavery was also a historical concept. Right from Greece, from the days of Greece, when armies went to war and an army was defeated, or a state was defeated, they would pick up children, women, they would kill the men, children and women were picked up as slaves. So slavery is again a very ancient concept with human societies. From feudalism to capitalism, another process of organization of labor was work in European colonies. Traders from Europe had established outposts where they purchased slaves from local African. And what are these local African? Again, Africa as a cultural construct, they were tribals. When these tribes would fight with each other, they would pick up and one tribe would lose. All the young men were taken as slaves and sold. And when the European traders came in, these slaves were sold to the European traders. These laborers were transported to plantation colonies, labor in coffee, tobacco, cocoa, sugar, cotton plantations, and as domestic servants. So when we go to NDI 9 and we look at human trafficking also has a historical context from slavery. Because somewhere down the line, human being has remained the same, different processes, more refined, more, efficient, but a lot of human being has remained the same. Migration puts this figure as about 12 million Africans who were shipped across Atlantic through violence and barter. Some parts of Africa, Europe, Asia, and America for centuries. A lot of Chinese were shipped to America to build. Most of the railroad was built by Chinese. As property, slaves were listed in plantation accounts and recorded as items in inventories. And simultaneously, when the world started looking at slavery as a barbaric practice, remember, there was the concept of democracy, liberty, equality, which also started coming as, concepts. All these engines were working parallelly. Then slavery was banned. And when slavery was banned, the British came out with this indentured labor concept. Another system of labor recruitment, it started in European colonies, which was the indentured laborers. For contractual labor could be granted freedom after a specialized period of time. It was a contract, but more often than not, they were like slaves because there was a contractual, owner. It was initiated by British Mauritius and was considered as an experiment after abolition of slavery. In fact, a majority of Indians in most of the Caribbeans, Africa, were all indentured laborers. Fiji, working and living conditions of workers, no laws to regulate. No laws prevent factories from hiring 7-year-old children to full-time work. Why would they recruit children? Because they had to pay less. And children were more malleable. Women and children were more malleable. They could be scared into working. So if you see all zari industry, carpet industry employs a lot of children. Sari making, children and women. BD making, cracker industry. That way, the people can take in more profits. No laws regulated hours of working conditions, what factories could do with their hazardous waste. Government had no. And the concept of laissez-faire, leave the capitalists alone, leave the factories alone, had no role in regulating the new industries or planning services for new towns. What yesterday we were talking about in there was this case of Punjab and Ludhiana where land is going, factories are coming, agriculture is so inevitably, unless there is a larger policy overview, there will be the capitalist system which will work. The new working class has little or no bargaining power. In fact, the British government passed a law against, organizing. Time landowners were enclosing common village land. People from countryside flocked to the town and new factories. Now, this changes in, common land into private land was the start of capitalism. Very high unemployment rate for workers in the first phases of industrial revolution, because agriculture and the countryside were collapsing, and there was not enough work which was generated. And then simultaneously, this slavery, indentured labor, which was much cheaper than what they had to pay otherwise. Only wealthy people in Great Britain were eligible. And then the political rights. In fact, India has done so much better in terms of universal suffrage, in terms of giving voting rights to women. We started when we were independent, we already had women and everybody having equal rights. Unlike the West, where women had to fight, other sections of the people had to fight for a vote. 79 to 1800, British Parliament passed the Combination Act, illegal for workers to unionize or combine. 719 to 1840, working conditions were very tough and sometimes tragic. In fact, as I was saying, Charles Dickens' novels are written in the context of the Industrial Revolution. So most of his characters go through a lot of hardship. As workers migrated from the country to the city, their lives were utterly and permanently transformed. What we see in India, what we see in other countries. The quality of life decreased a great deal in the first 60 years of Industrial Revolution. The Poor Law of 1834 created workhouses for the destitutes, designed to be deliberately harsh place to discourage people from staying on relief. We still talk about these freebies, government aided relief. Transformed the role of the family, and obviously institutions of family got transformed. The work, how the countryside, various other institutions in the rural areas that occurred in the factories occurred in the lives of working class families and broke up the family economy. Work and home life became sharply separated. So today, what we talk about, work home balance, or work personal and professional life balance, was disrupted by the Industrial Revolution. Men earned money for the families, and that's where earlier, when women were almost an equal partner with men, women got confined to home and men came out in the factories. Women took care of home and saw their economic role decline. So you see, all these had a historical context too. There is also a political context to it, but that's a story for another time. The Combination Act forbade workers to form any kind of union. Even after this, unions were still severely restricted. To effect change was to strike action. And how this negotiation happened between unions and factory owners, 1830 and 40, the Chartist movement was first large-scale organized working class political movement. And that's where political parties like the Labour Party came out. where the workers organize into a political forum. So you see, there are, as I was telling yesterday, there are multiple engines at work, and how these engines negotiate with each other. Political organization for working people was achieved through trade unions, who after extension began to support socialist political parties that later merged to form the British Labour Party. Our socialist party, like the JDU or the Samajwadi Party, were the socialist party, came out of trade unions, labor movements. And if you've seen, even in India, the role of labor unions has decreased. Big companies like Amazon, Uber, or other companies, try and prevent workers from unionizing. Okay, summing up. All these systems developed in response to need of society, structures of social organization, development of technology, factory which met the requirement of developed capitalism during late 18th and 19th century, curbed relative independence of worker. So they were all linked to each other. Everything had a consequence. Some were intended, some were unintended. Factory represented the main form of production under developed capitalism in the 19th century. There are some references. Economic history of Europe. You can also Google or even ask Chat GPT. So, how was how was production organized in India during the 16th century or 17th century? You must also look at the GDP map, which is there. It is there on the internet. I have seen it in terms of how the GDP has changed between Orient and the West. A history of capitalism, Akar books. Okay, let me stop sharing. Let me switch on my video. Hi guys. Any questions? Any questions? And again, I've been telling you, I think it's a good idea to read MDI 8 first and then go on to MDI 7 rather than the other way. Because the production process or the production organization will get you a good idea in terms of the labor and the labor markets. Because as the production changes, the labor and the labor markets change. And read together in terms of assignments or in terms of your examination. You'll be able to handle it much better. And do not get stuck with formulas and graphs unless you're an economic student. That way you will be able to handle it. Otherwise, go by simple understanding of the subject. Guys, any question?
Sir, thank you so much.
Hello.
Sir, thank you so much. Gurpreet.
Okay. Any questions? Domingos, any question?
Right now, I don't have any questions, sir.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, in that case, I think it's lunchtime. Let's call it a day. I will anyway be seeing you at 5:30 with MDI 9, which is human trafficking. In fact, what we'll be doing in human trafficking is today the definitions and the types. So I'll see you at 5:30 again for whoever wants to join, and we'll take it up from there and meet next week for MDI 7 and 8. Bye, guys.
Thank you, sir.
Bye,
Thank you.
guys.